look into the organization, it's a great one to be a part of. We kicked this off because we were interested in abandoned mine lands and how do we pull a whole broad spectrum of folks together to try to figure out how we could get out and get some work done in the field. And we learned a lot from Trout Unlimited's longstanding participation. And one of the phrases that was coined in the very beginning in 2018 was, don't let perfection be the enemy of improvement. So anytime that we can come together and make some improvement in the field, we should. And Trout Unlimited and other conservation groups have been able to illustrate how to do that. Need to do a bit of a safety share. So it's hot out there, especially for somebody who's not from this area. And the sun is beating down, and therefore so are the potential for sunburns. So it's that time of year that we ought to all be, we're going to want to shed some of the layers, and that'll expose more skin. So let's make sure that we all have hats to cover our blessed heads, and then also sunscreen to try to keep sunburns at bay. As well, if we were to have an issue, a fire alarm of some sort, let's blow out through these doors onto the patio, and then the muster area, the gathering area, would be out in front of the main entrance to the hotel under a series of something like 6 big, beautiful palm trees. That's it for me. On an introductory aspect, I am a mineral development professional. I've been working in the mining industry for a good 40 years, gray hair to prove it. And I've worked in many factions, from exploration to project development and building companies. And my sweet spot is project development. I love all the different aspects that come into pulling a project together and getting it to either a construction decision or some kind of a development decision. Enough about me. So we have a strong panel here. We have Tawny Bridgeford with National Mining Association, Corey Fisher with Trout Unlimited, Natalie Muhlenberg.
Yes.
Nice. Muhlenberg County. And she's the project manager for Watershed Improvement Unit of the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. And then Melvin Yazzie, who's the principal mining engineer for the Navajo Abandoned Mine Lands Reclamation Department. So great panel. We're going to focus, Tawny will kick it off, and the speakers will go in order as they've been, as they're sitting at the podium. We're going to keep it to about a 5-minute, little bit over, because these guys, we have 4 instead of Jeff's panel, which is, he's always an overachiever, my co-facilitator. Jeff, if you could stand up so everybody knows who you are. Jeff Parsley was the SRK. He's got 6 at least, and then 1 on Zoom. So we're attempting to kind of keep the discussions to the presentations to a minimum, and then allow a lot more Q&A from the field, as well as our Zoomers on the virtual realm. Grab. Where did I put that? Is it underneath? Oh, did you? No, it's not there. That's all right. I think to help with the facilitation of this, instead of, we've compiled a bio compilation that'll be on the website. I'm going to have each of the speakers give their own intro so that they can maximize their time. Tawny is the Deputy General Counsel and Vice President, Regulatory Affairs of National Mining Association. She's been at least 18 years with the organization, and probably those 18 years talking about AML. She's going to give us an update from DC's perspective, from Washington. We have a great alignment of members of Congress around an abandoned mine lands legislation that probably has a good opportunity to get passed. So, Tawny, I'll let you take the podium.
Thanks, Ann. And I was told I had 10 minutes. So if I go over 5, hook me at 10. Oh, is that separate?
Can I get some help? Thought I just hit escape and then it would pop up. Watch it.
Here. I thought so too. No, we don't want to leave the.
There it is.
Yeah.
Oops, that's fine.
And then here we go.
There we go.
Slideshow from vacation. There we go. More.
No, that's fine. Let's just keep going.
I don't-
Yeah, we just hit the arrows.
Oh, hot. This. There we go. And then you'll just advance. Great. Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you to MMSA and the other summit sponsors for inviting me to speak today with this esteemed panel on such a very important topic. It's hard to believe that 4 years have passed since I last joined the summit, where we did some really interesting breakout sessions together to try and figure out how are we going to advance Good Samaritan legislation and what are the critical components for that program. When Ann first approached me several months ago to discuss how that discussion has since evolved in the nation's capital, the National Mining Association and Trout Unlimited and the American Exploration and Mining Association were really still hard at work to try and lock down the final details of what is now, and I'm really excited to say this, the first bipartisan bill introduced since 2009. And you're going to hear me say that a lot today because this issue has quite a bit of history, and here we are in 2022. But before I get ahead of myself, as I mentioned, there is a long history, over 20 years of it, of legislative efforts that really must be acknowledged. As I think everybody in this room knows, getting a bill introduced in Congress is a great first step. In fact, on my count, 18 bills have been introduced in the House and Senate over the last 2 decades. And if I missed a couple, I apologize, but there's been many, and there's been a lot of draft discussion bills that are still sitting on shelves. And Corey and I have worked on several of those as well. Yet only one bill has moved past introduction and through the Senate and Environment Public Works Committee, and that happened about 16 years ago. The number of hours and resources spent by stakeholders, congressional leadership, and staff on this legislative effort is quite astounding. Despite all these years, there remains a strong, steadfast commitment from the mining industry and Trout Unlimited to move legislation across the finish line so that we can stand up Good Samaritan permitting program that would provide meaningful environmental and public health improvements to local communities. So the National Mining Association and our members have been engaged in this decades-long dialogue so that mining companies can voluntarily remediate abandoned mine lands without incurring liability for sites that they never owned or previously operated. And my involvement, sort of the history and introduction of myself, is that I got involved in this 6 years ago. And that was in August of 2015 when the Gold King mine spill occurred. And as everyone knows, that became quickly the huge catalyst for legislative action in the most recent times. And bills were introduced in the 114th and 115th Congress in response, but did not receive the bipartisan support that was necessary for ultimate movement. So fast forward to 2019, and I want to give a huge amount of credit to Corey and Steve Moyer and others at Trout Unlimited for kickstarting the most effective dialogue that I personally have been involved in on this issue. In early 2019, following the MMSA 2018 conference, we were invited to a table amongst all of the major stakeholders back in DC to discuss how we're going to move this forward. And I think all of us had spent so many years separately working to draft and negotiate and introduce, sorry that advanced before I meant to, working to draft, negotiate, and introduce a working permitting solution And by bringing us all together, we really were able to identify the top outstanding issues for our organizations that needed resolution in order to find a compromise. And I think we started off with one 8x11 piece of paper that had probably 20 issues on it. And we were able to whittle it down to what you see on this slide. So I think what really came out of Gold King and all of the efforts to push for broader Good Samaritan legislation was we needed to step back and we need to revisit, are we looking for a broad permitting program, or do we need to really build trust that this can happen on the ground and make really significant environmental improvements? So that's when the pivot to this pilot project permitting program happened. So how many projects would be allowed? What would be the scope of those projects? What kind of environmental goal are we trying to achieve? Is it strict water quality standards, or is it partial improvements that will really still mean something to the local communities? What kind of environmental review? What is the public's involvement? How much are the liability protections? What does that cover? What statutes? Are there limitations to that liability? Reprocessing, big topic these days, will that be allowed? And if so, what kind of conditions are on that? And then finally, a lot of environmental organizations feel that you can't have a permitting program that is legitimate without providing them the ability to sue, to put a check on Good Samaritans who are trying to do the good work. So are citizen suit provisions appropriate? So for the next 2 years, we reviewed previous legislation. We meticulously discussed critical components of the bill, and we came to the table, all of us, with compromises. And Corey, I think maybe we can count on 2 hands the number of drafts that we reviewed in those 2 years, 10, maybe 15. I don't know, but we reviewed it line by line, word by word during that amount of time. And one thing I certainly learned is you cannot discuss these issues in silos to be successful. I think through this open and professional dialogue, we were better equipped to understand each other's concerns and really produce a consensus report. So here we are today. That approach translated into what you see on the screen. We have now a Senate introduced bill, S3571. I provided links to the bill, the section by section and summary to the conference folks, and hopefully they can send that out to all of you all. But a special thank you to Senators Heinrich and Risch and their staff in leading the charge this Congress. Their introduction of the bill has already garnered 12 co-sponsors of bipartisan, I said it again, bipartisan support, 12. That's really huge for this bill. And I think that's great for it to hopefully move forward. So would any stakeholder at the table say this bill is perfect, Anne? No, they probably wouldn't. But we aren't letting the perfect get away in the way of progress. So in my opinion, this bill really should be respected as the best legislative vehicle we have to build trust and confidence that a permitting program with liability protections for Good Sams, including mining companies, would not worsen environmental problems or be used as a backdoor for mining without the appropriate permits. So on this slide, you will see the major components of the bill. I want to emphasize again, this is a pilot program, a program that would only allow 15, and this is important, low-risk projects at abandoned mine sites. Again, the purpose is to build trust that this can be done right. The pilot program would be administered by EPA on non-federal lands. Federal land management agencies have oversight and NEPA review on projects on US lands. Unlike previous Good Sam bills where we built in an ability for states to take over the permitting program, we did not address that in this legislation because again, it is a pilot project legislation. We can revisit that concept if we do get to a point where we're talking about a broader Good Samaritan bill, but states do have the right for notification, consultation, and opportunity for comment, same with the tribes. So what does the permit do? What's not shown on the slide are the rigorous requirements an applicant must meet to get a project authorized. So take a look at the bill, but some very important compromises. NEPA, pilot projects need to go under an environmental assessment under the National Environmental Policy Act. That was a huge compromise for the mining industry that we would like to raise. Also on reprocessing, that is allowed, but only on federal lands and if excess profits go into a new abandoned mine remediation fund. Good Samaritans do get liability protections, but those are tailored. If a Good Sam violates their permit and doesn't correct that violation to the conditions previously, they will be held liable for those violations. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have during this conference. What I want to make sure you all understand is what this does not do. It does not give a free pass to owners and operators of abandoned mine lands to not come up to its liability and responsibility for cleaning up sites. It does not authorize new mining projects. So that's really important to emphasize. I think there's a lot of good momentum back in DC. The Biden administration has supported Good Samaritan legislation and giving Good Sam's legal liability protections. They're also really interested in reprocessing of mineral waste. There's a lot of opportunity here and happy to talk about more of that today's conference. So thank you very much. And I will just show who supports this so far, and we look for other support as well. Thank you.
Corey Fisher.
Yeah. Well, good morning, and thank you, Ann. Thank you, MMSA, for hosting this conference and inviting me and Trot Unlimited to be a part of it. It's a very important time for this work. As Tani discussed about, Good Sam legislation and an opportunity to advance that legislation in Congress. And it's after 2 years of COVID and working remotely, it's nice to see faces and be in person and see old friends and meet new allies in AML. So I'm Corey Fisher, and I'm the Public Lands Policy Director for Trout Unlimited's Angler Conservation Project. My portfolio of work includes a wide range of issues affecting the health and management of public lands. And it seems like more and more these days, that comes to mining policy, Good Sam, and AML work. And that's rightfully so. When you look at the needs of society, I'm going to talk a little bit later on about critical minerals and the kind of role we see for Good Sams in that. And it's, the kind of coming together that we've seen around this issue from diverse interests is, it's encouraging, and do want to thank Tani with National Mining Association and AEMA as well for being such good partners as we've negotiated this bill and tried to really work through some of the sticking points that have been sticking points for decades, and to really be able to kind of break that logjam and see a bipartisan Good Sam bill that has such diverse support among Republicans and Democrats throughout Western states. A little bit of introduction to Trout Unlimited. We are a nationwide grassroots conservation organization with a mission to bring together diverse interests to care for and recover rivers and streams so that our children can experience the joy of wild and native trout and salmon. We have about 300,000 members and supporters throughout the country, organized amongst about 400 local chapters. So really have a strong grassroots presence that works hand in glove with professional staff, like Jason, who you're going to hear from here on the next panel, in restoration works, and then within advocacy as well. Trying to advance.
Yeah. Hang on. It's a Zoom thing.
There we go. We'll just kind of try to make our way through these slides. So within the field of conservation nonprofits, Trout Unlimited is somewhat unique. Kind of that we are able to pair on the ground restoration work with policy advocacy. On the right there, you see Lauren Duncan, who is our Colorado AML project manager, testifying before House Natural Resources Committee on a hearing earlier this year on 1872 and talking about Good Samaritan and the need for Good Samaritan legislation. And, that's not the first time that Trout Unlimited has testified on Good Samaritan. And it's because we do this work on the ground and we do this work in Washington, D.C., and there's not a lot of organizations in the conservation field that can say that. So within our government relations staff, we have 3 based in Arlington, Virginia, as well as field-based government relations folks like myself, who kind of serve as a bridge between that on-the-ground work and our advocacy in Washington, D.C. So yeah, it's this blend of on-the-ground work and policy advocacy that positions us to really work with anyone that wants to help make our streams and watersheds healthier. And that leads us to working with mining and other industries, state and federal agencies, local communities, again, really anyone that wants to help make our streams healthier. Within this arena, my focus is really on AML funding, responsible mining policy, and then also Good Sam. So why does it matter to Trout Unlimited and Trout? EPA estimates that about 40% of our headwater streams are polluted by abandoned mines, and that we have a robust science program with a team of spatial analysis who did analysis and found that about 110 miles of streams listed for heavy metals at acidity, and about 20% of those are in subwatersheds that support native trout. Of native trout species, about 28, there are 3 of those that are extinct and 6 that are listed as threatened or endangered. It's when you combine the decline that we've seen of native trout with the impacts that we're seeing and going to be seeing from climate change, work to restore and build resiliency of these watersheds is super important. And there's an important role there for abandoned mine work to, again, improve the resilience of these streams, to make sure that as we look at climate change, as we look at all these impacts affecting trout, that the next generation is going to have those healthy populations. And the last thing I'll say on this is that it's a tremendous problem. We all know this. Some estimates are 33,000 abandoned mines polluting the environment. Those estimates vary, but an important kind of takeaway, I think, is that it's a big problem, but it's a fixable problem. We know how to fix this. We just need the right policy tools and funding to get after it. All right, it advanced that time. So again, I mentioned our team of spatial analysis and our science team who put together this map for us that shows AML sites overlapped with cold water fisheries. It's pretty obvious how big of this problem, not just in the Mountain West, but also in Appalachia as well. To date, our Western Hard Rock Abandoned Mine Reclamation Program has focused largely in Colorado and Montana, in large part because that's where we have these robust partnerships. So again, our mission is about bringing together diverse interests, and that includes partnerships, again, with anybody that wants to help us improve the health of these watersheds. This map doesn't show Alaska, but I would be remiss not to mention that we have kicked off a program in Alaska with Kinross Gold to restore Resurrection Creek near Hope. I just kind of find it, a little bit there's a metaphor there that restoring Resurrection Creek near Hope, Alaska, that kind of exemplifies this work, right? So I mentioned one of the key pieces here is looking at abandoned mine land funding. sometimes feel like, yeah, we are oftentimes cobbling together, just various sources of funding. But one of the things that happened in the past year was the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that created this brand new abandoned mine land program, hard rock abandoned mine land program within the Department of the Interior, and it included a $3 billion authorization for that. Unfortunately, Congress has yet to make good on that promise, but we see a tremendous opportunity in the fiscal year 23 appropriation cycle that's going on right now to stand up this program. Unfortunately, the president's budget that was released last week did not include funding specifically for this program. But that's something that we're really working to change and make sure that when Congress does pass a budget, that it stands up this program so that organizations, Native nations, state agencies, and our federal land management agencies have the resources to attack this problem at the scale that it warrants. Just want to say a little bit about critical minerals here as well. We see abandoned mine cleanups as an important part of the critical minerals puzzle. And the Good Sam is key to unlocking the private sector to not only clean up abandoned mines, but also deploy emerging technologies and existing technologies to recover raw materials for clean energy, for a clean energy future. Good Sam's not a silver bullet for critical minerals, but there are no silver bullets, and every little piece of the puzzle is important. And I think that this kind of issue of critical minerals has perhaps opened the eyes of some folks who are suspicious of Good Sam and suspicious of the mining industry being involved, and kind of waking up to see that, oh no, this is part of a solution and it's something that should be supported. So are we making progress? I think that's a fair question. Tawny mentioned the list of bills, the first one being a 1999 bipartisan bill with Senator Max Baucus and Ben Nighthorse Campbell. And his remarks on the Senate floor, Senator Baucus said that it's not perfect. The bill does not reflect a complete consensus. There are further issues to work through, but my hope is that we can proceed quickly through a hearing and markup so that before long, this important bill can be enacted into law. Some would say we're at that same point today, but I'd argue that we're well beyond that, and that the bipartisan support that we've seen for this legislation is indicative of that momentum, and that we're going to be able to get some of this work done. The photo you see here is 9 Mile Creek near where I live in Missoula, Montana, and it shows the work that Trout Unlimited and partners with the Forest Service and others have been able to do to restore. This is a placer mining site. And I think that, again, this work we do, it is about hope, it is about restoration, it is about making the world a better place, and just appreciate everyone in this room who's putting their shoulder to that wheel.
Thank you, Corey. Excellent. Natalie is with the state of Arizona. And I just want to indicate the MMSA's AML Summit. We march around the West largely because we're looking at for these summits and hosting in different areas, different states and regions, because the objective is for us to expand the conversation from just, say, being in a central location. We initiated it in Colorado. We've expanded it to Nevada. We're now here in the Southwest, and the next time we do it next year will be in another region that the committee hasn't decided upon. And we do that so that we can expand partnerships, so that we can engage with the state agencies and others in the region that we don't have an opportunity to engage with. So Natalie will be bringing the state of Arizona's perspective, not only on maybe what they're doing, but additionally on how we can all begin to engage better and work together and partner in the field. Oh yeah. Watch out, everybody. I meant to mention we should all turn our phones off. but you could play that tune again. All right, Natalie.
Hello, everyone. My name is Natalie Molenberg, and I lead the Watershed Improvement Unit at the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. We're a team of hydrogeologists, scientists, and project managers, and we implement remediation projects on abandoned mine lands that are contributing to surface water quality exceedances under the Clean Water Act. We're not a big team by any measure, but we do what we can, prioritizing those sites that are negatively impacting public health and the environment. Uh-oh, and now I'm having the same issue. Click. Aha, here we go. Got it. And this is why we do it. So these are streams that we're currently working in. And as you can see, they're frequented by humans and wildlife. And so this is why we want to clean up these sites. We're primarily focused on two main watersheds right now, the Hassayampa River watershed south of Prescott, and then several streams in the Patagonia Mountains south of Tucson. And so all these streams are listed as impaired under the Clean Water Act for not meeting surface water quality standards for heavy metals, things like cadmium, copper, lead, and zinc. Ultimately, our goal is to delist the impaired waters under the Clean Water Act. And so we're working within this nexus of remediating these abandoned mines under the Clean Water Act. How we do it can be summarized in three major phases. First, we do surface water quality sampling, stream sampling, to determine the health of the water body. And then we can do further site characterization to delineate the different mine features and their contributions or their loadings into the water body. After we do that, we move on to implement on the ground remediation. Furthering any site characterization, doing the remediation design, and then implementing the solution. After that, we then want to measure the success of the remediation. So we do some more stream sampling, and we also try to calculate the specific metals load reductions that were achieved from the remediation. And that'll help us determine whether or not the water body can be delisted under the Clean Water Act. So we've had many successes. Whoops, let me go back. There we go. In 2018, this is when we started primarily focusing on key watersheds and on abandoned mine lands specifically. And since then, we've actually remediated 6 sites. And one site in particular, that remediation led to the delistings of 2 individual parameters under the Clean Water Act, which was a huge success. And it's not just due to ADEQ. This work wouldn't be possible without our partnerships with public and private landowners, especially the private landowners, as well as our consultants and their subcontractors. The trust that we build with the landowners is critical if we're going to get access to these sites to clean them up. But there's a lot more to do. So there's many more of these sites in Arizona. The State Mine Inspector's Office actually estimates there's anywhere close to 100,000 of these sites in the state. And it's unknown how many of those are contributing to surface water body impairments. And so we'd like to see the development of a comprehensive and accurate statewide inventory of these sites and their features, and which ones are contributing to the impairments so that we can prioritize them accordingly. We also want to develop thoughtful metrics for success. Our team's key metric is the delisting of the water bodies under the Clean Water Act when they attain the standards. And we know too that these sites are going to need interdisciplinary solutions. engineers, scientists, cultural resource specialists, biologists. We need to get creative with the solutions and consider the long-term sustainability of the land for the people and the wildlife that depend on it. And so we're always looking for new ideas and solutions. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or want to get involved and partner with us. And I look forward to seeing some of you tomorrow during our site tour, where you're going to get to see 2 sites that we've remediated in person. Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. Now we have Melvin Yazzie from the Navajo Nation. Let's see what it's, and that's right, we got a PDF on this one. So I think you just advance it by scrolling down. Do you know how to do that, Jeff? You can do it, okay, yeah. I'm not task trained. Thank you, Melvin.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Melvin Yazzie. I'm a principal mining engineer with the Navajo Nation's Abandoned Mines Program under the Division of Natural Resources. So the conference, again, thank you for MMSA for inviting us. I think the theme here is matching what we're doing on the Navajo Nation in terms of our reclamation activities. So the Navajo Nation, we cover 3 states, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, over 27,000 square miles. Our main office is in Window Rock, Arizona, with our field office in Shiprock, New Mexico, and Tuba City, Arizona. We have approximately 15 staff on board right now. I do have some of my colleagues here sitting at the table, so feel free during the whole interaction to ask questions with them also. But we're under the authority of what's called the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act of 1977, which is emphasizing reclamation on abandoned coal mines. But we've been what we call a certified tribe since 1994, which allows us to do reclamation activities on non-coal mines. So when we're looking at the Navajo Nation, we're looking at coal, uranium, copper, sand and gravel, and limestone sites. We're one of 32 states and tribes that are part of what's called the National Association of Abandoned Mine Lands Programs, which is throughout the United States. So we have a yearly conference this coming year. It'll be in Grand Junction in October. So when you're looking at trying to get ideas about what reclamation activity is, that's another way that a lot of partnerships and sharing of information is available. The Navajo Nation, we've been doing reclamation for over 30 years. And when we look at what kind of information are we collecting, it always comes back to your initial site assessment, your inventory phase. What are you looking at? So some of the key ideas that we're documenting is your mineral. Is it a surface underground mine, and what kind of actual mineral are we looking at? But we also are identifying the geology, your hydrology. NEPA is one of the big considerations since we're under the Department of Interior. We have to summarize everything in a categorical exclusion or environmental assessment. So when you're doing your data collection and looking at preferred alternatives, your public relations is always important. How are you going to share this information with the communities? For us, we also share information with the tribal, state, and federal agencies. Your post land use, what is actually going to, when you're done with it, what's it going to be used for? Then we always have to keep in mind that Mother Nature is dynamic. Anything you do, she's going to want to change it. So you got to, when you're thinking about ideas, your alternative, you got to keep this in mind. And for us, when we're looking at alternatives, it always comes into your costs. Cost is increasing a lot these days compared to when we were doing a lot of reclamation. But for us, when we are talking about the public relations, we're also talking about our culture. How are we going to explain what we're going to be doing in terms of reclamation at the community level to the people? Because ultimately, there are end users. But as we're all aware, science, we want to build something that's going to stand there with what we call non-natural material. So as an end product, how are we going to mesh what's natural versus what's man-made? In terms of our activities, we've gone through a reclamation phase where it used to be basic cut and fill activities where anything that's a depression, we backfill it and contour it. But as we've developed partnerships with different entities, we've gotten different ideas. We've also attended different conferences like Waste Management, which is radioactive materials here in Phoenix, yearly basis. But we also attended another one called StormCon, which deals with municipal cities with surface water runoff. So in the arid Southwest, we have monsoon rains, which are high intensity. How are we going to deal with that? That's similar to the cities. How do they deal with their stormwaters? So as we progress in our thought about reclamation, how are we going to balance this in the real world? So one of the things we looked at in terms of different concepts of just a back cut and fill reclamation activity is what was called geomorphic contouring. So this is a picture of a site out in Cameron, Arizona, where you see the natural watershed and how it's draining. When we talk about geomorphic contouring, I use the concept of a tree. Everything has branches, but ultimately drains into a truck. So how are you going to control your surface water on here? So in the real world, there's a mine up in the northwest New Mexico, La Plata mine. This is a large strip mining or open pit mine. And this is how they did the natural geomorphic contouring. So they've actually were able to implement the contouring on a large scale. So you see all the different drainage patterns, but they also have the natural vegetation that they've utilized. So with Navajo AML, we're looking at, are we going to use native material on site? That's where when we do our initial site investigation, I had mentioned geology. What kind of rock is on site and available? Sandstones, limestone, or even the clay stones. Those are good material when we are going to be looking at some of our reclamation. The filter fabrics, we've also used that to help stabilize some of our uranium mine waste. And it's also, if the site actually erodes, it's a good ID that if it gets to that, you need to do some kind of maintenance. Then I mentioned the geomorphic contouring. If you're in clay material, you can probably do the mounds. But if you're in some of these small mesas and canyons, we do what we call a geologic or contouring with the native rock there. But we don't revegetate anything. One of the things that we always emphasize is leave it rough graded. So you can see how the sandstone is all rough, breaking this drainage into different patterns. But with the rough contouring, the rock and sand allows the native seeds to come in and basically revegetate itself. Sometimes on these diversion berms that we call, we'll line them with the filter fabric to also help stabilize it and trap whatever we can. So this is on the side of a mesa where we did an on-site burial of some of our uranium mine waste. We used the filter fabric again to stabilize the mine waste on site, but we also used the sandstone to build a retaining wall to maintain that site location. One of the partnerships that we did with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency on their site, they had this disposal site that was just all flat. So they started having erosion. So we pitched the concept of enhanced geomorphic reclamation on it, where we help stabilize the site with some of the rock retaining walls and the drainage patterns. So it looks, the other thing is using the native material that's on site, it blends in a lot more with what's native. One thing that we've also stressed in terms of using the on-site sandstones, clay stones, is that you're going to save in costs in terms of trying to import. If you were to use a sand or riprap, which is your quartzites, river rock, there's no river rock within probably 50 miles of this site. So we couldn't find anything to help stabilize this. So using the native material is what we're starting to emphasize. But one thing that we always do or stress is also partnerships. We always are open to what we call show and tell, showing people what we're thinking of, but we're also heavy into STEM activities also. So trying to develop the youth within the Navajo Nation and some of the partners is something that we always have to strive to. So I think in terms of the MMSA, that's something that needs to be expanded. This is what we've stressed with some of our other federal partners like Department of Energy, US EPA, and Department of Interior. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. That was an excellent panel discussion. Appreciate all the content. We're now going to move into the Q&A phase. I do want to mention that EPA usually is sitting at the table with us, and we applaud the efforts and partnerships that and sharings that they've done since 2018. Shahid Mahmood wasn't able to join us this time, had already conflicted conflicts, if you will, scheduling conflicts. So we want to at least let everybody know that they've been a driver at the seat of the table. They've really been trying to initiate through Shahid's actions a pilot program. We've been talking about it and trying to implement both individually, if you will, without legislation, but now with legislation. So just wanted to let everybody know that the partners are expansive. They're federal agencies, they're state agencies. Great to have the examples that Natalie just illustrated going on here in Arizona. And I suspect that we'd also be seeing that in New Mexico as well. Do we have any questions from the field? We've had from the room here and also from Zoom. I know that Judy's going to be monitoring the Zoom chat room. Any questions? Jeff's going to march around with the microphone to help everybody out. And we would like folks to just introduce themselves by name and then what their affiliation is before their question.
Jeff Mock, USGS. Thanks for all your presentations. Fantastic work. You know, it's great to see everybody moving in this direction. My question is, has there been any movement on selecting those 15 priority sites? And if so, are you able to discuss that at all?
Not that I'm aware of. I think we're just trying to get the legislation through Congress first and have it enacted. And I'm sure Trout Unlimited, you guys must have some ideas.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those chicken or the egg type situations in some ways, but you know, our field staff definitely have ideas for sites that would be really good SAM candidates. But you know, it's not. There isn't a list of projects that would be you know, right out of the gate analyzed and approved and permitted by the EPA. You know, each of those projects that would be proposed would be, you know, fully vetted and move forward. So we don't have a list, but definitely have projects in mind.
Do you have a suggestion or two?
There's a lot going on in this space. USGS recently had a large input of dollars to work on critical minerals from abandoned mine waste or mine waste. And we're working on prioritizing sites for that right now. We've also been funded to make a up-to-date inventory of where those mine waste piles are throughout the United States. So USGS is definitely moving on all that stuff. And, we work very hard at reaching out to people, but obviously there's lots of opportunities for cross-pollination here, which I think benefits everybody in the room. So that's great. That's great.
And when you're,
Just want to encourage that.
yeah, I know you're going to be on one of the other panels, and we'll pepper you with questions then too, but I'd like to, I may come back to you if that's all right, because it's a free for all. But Natalie, I think from your perspective, maybe the Arizona perspective, and then also somebody from Virginia, from New Mexico as well, to just, I mean, part of the idea here is for us to exchange ideas that these guys can take back and present and continue to drive the discussions in DC to kind of an end game.
I was gonna do my plug here in Arizona. So we can take all 15, but we've got ideas too. We're working predominantly going through our total maximum daily loads analyses that kind of list potential sites that are contributing to exceedances in water bodies. And so we're working on building that exhaustive long list.
Yeah, you guys can't have 15 because Nevada needs 10. So the rest of you have to split up the remaining 5.
Okay,
And so the fight.
there's gonna be a
begins.
brawl.
I think Colorado would be in there too, right?
Well, and so will New Mexico. Since I was put on the spot, I'm Virginia McNamara. I'm a geologist with Mexico Bureau of Geology, Mineral Resources. You'll hear from me a little bit later. And one of the things I want to put out there right away is that there's a lot of sites that have been reclaimed. And yet I know as a geologist and studying geological processes, they are still contributing to issues, environmental issues in the underground and even sometimes at surface. So as I'm working with USGS on trying to figure out how we're going to move on this mine waste project, one of the issues I've come up with is that how, in order for us to know what is in some of these mine wastes, and they've been reclaimed and they're covered, how are we going to get into them to do some sampling to see how we can, one, prevent further environmental issues, but two, if there are critical minerals or other minerals in there. And this is something I've been, struggling with. I mean, right now I've got a couple of sites that I'm proposing to the USGS to study that haven't been reclaimed. So that solves it for the midterm. But, in the long run of things, we probably do want to remine a lot of these. And yet, how are we going to get into the mine waste and sample them?
The bill is written actually does address that a little bit. If you can have an investigative permit first to do the kind of metallurgical testing on mine waste to see if it's a viable project. So we have started to think about that. I think the question is whether or not the federal government would consider reprocessing to be a low risk site that's eligible for these pilot projects.
Melvin, I'd like to fold you into the discussion. Are there sites on Navajo lands that you guys would like to see additional partners on that could be part of the pilot program of examples?
So I had mentioned that we did reclamation on some of the uranium mines. Now, there's a 5 federal agency legislation or word from Congress where 5 federal agencies are supposed to be coming to the Navajo Nation to further assess the impacts of uranium. And the lead authority under CERCLA authority, which is when we are talking about reclamation versus remediation, there's a big difference. So all the uranium mines on the Navajo Nation now fall under the authority of the U.S. Environmental Protection and also the Navajo Environmental Protection agencies to do further assessments and remediation on the uranium mines. So in terms of those sites, there's different authorities now. The Department of Energy also under what's called their defense-related uranium mines, DRUMS, is doing site assessments on the Navajo Nation. But this is more similar to what under the authority of SMACRA, the Navajo abandoned mines has already done in terms of reclamation. So we continue to partner with the federal agencies to further assess the impacts of any kind of mine on the Navajo Nation. And by us having done having us done the inventory on the Navajo Nation, we are familiar with where the mines, and we can further partner with the federal agencies. One of the drawbacks is that we are only authorized to do work on what's called tribal trust lands. So there's different land authorities on the Navajo Nation that have different authorities with the authority. So we can continue to partner with them and give our recommendations to them. So I think we are covering most of the Navajo Nation in terms of partnerships.
Yes. Hang
Hold on,
we're
hold
gonna-
on.
We're gonna give you
People in the
mic.
back can't hear you.
Sorry. Plus the people on Zoom can't.
Oh, sorry. So Sarah Martinez, USDA Forest Service. Melvin, is the Navajo Nation done with your entire inventory of AML?
So in terms of anything under the SMACRA authority, I think we are done with it. Now, there's still, again, the circle authority, so they're doing their reassessment to try to identify if they are done with their inventory.
Okay, okay. And then same question actually for Natalie. What about Arizona? Do you know if State Mines is completely done with their inventory on Arizona state land?
I don't particularly know, but I don't think they are.
So just to
That's-
give you an idea, like on Nogales Ranger District, where I'm due to change over in my job, we have over 1,600 just on Nogales West Ranger District on Coronado National Forest.
Okay, yeah.
So it's good to know that at least maybe one area of Arizona might have some
So
inventory done.
one quick disclaimer to that. During some of the presentation, there is talk about the hard rock mining possibly coming up. We have not really emphasized any kind of hard rock on the Navajo Nation, so that would be something that is sort of in the gray area.
Oh, okay. So maybe not.
Maybe not.
A corner of Arizona has been entirely inventoried. Okay. Do we happen to know if one?
We also have an interactive web base, so you can always go online
Oh,
to
good.
check out our inventory and what we
Okay.
have documented.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Do we happen to know if Montana or Colorado or anyone else is completely done with?
So if I could jump on the inventory grenade.
Yeah.
This has been a central focus of our discussions from 2018 on. Every state, every agency, every organization does an inventory differently. And it has to do with what their focuses are. And USGS currently is doing an inventory, if I understand correctly from previous conversations, on reprocessing opportunities. But that's not the full inventory. So inventories are kind of a tough thing to land on because everybody does them different. Like the USDA Forest Service might do an inventory, have different parameters than maybe a state agency. So there's some of the discussions, yeah. Some maybe march the mic back to Rob, if you don't mind. If there were a way that we could prioritize like mid-level to high risk projects so that we could really identify some of the key ones that would drive the pilot program for the next 7 years, that I think would be very useful because there's just a whole bailiwick of characterization. Rob? Use your big voice. Mhm. Already humans. Moderate to high risk ones, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I could try to paraphrase. So what Jeff just indicated is he's marching the mic back is that a lot of the inventories are done off a topo map and not field truth. So if a topo map had an X on it or some indication of a past mine, it became abandoned mine lands, but it could just be a little prospect pit less than 4 feet, right? So it doesn't really have impacts to the environment or to human health safety. So therein sort of lies the problem. Go ahead, Rob.
Hi, Rob Galeri with the State of Nevada AML program. The state of Nevada as well is a member state of the National Association of Abandoned Mine Programs. And one thing that's been happening recently is with the infrastructure bill and the creation of the new Hard Rock AML program, there was some money put towards it this fiscal year, $5 million for the entire nation. So kind of peanuts on the dollar, but it is something. And the National Association, as well as the Interstate Mining Compact Commission, have been working with OEPC, who is put in charge of developing this program. And one of the things for the big discussion is inventory, right? So with inventory, it's very difficult. Nevada has an inventory, but it's in 2 separate databases between the state, environmental and physical. And then you have the AMSCAM and the BLM. You have the new Forest Service, which they're trying to use our data to backfill it. They use our data to backfill AMSCAM. The Park Service has their data set. We have our data set of the Park Service. So it's kind of a mess when we look at that. What we're trying to do is develop a generalized data set for a national wide database. And this would be a very minimum database. This database would be designed to only report to Congress. Basically, here's your 15 required fields. It's minimum information. It's something that we could standardize, but then each individual agency has to use their own database for prioritization of projects and project planning, because it would be near impossible to fit every AML database that's out there into one centralized database to function for everyone.
Right. There's an example of just what Nevada's been wrestling with, and you can translate that onto all the other states, right? Yeah, go ahead.
So I hate to steal this away, but one of the
please.
things that Anne, just to let you folks know, and I'm looking for partners is so I'm the new national AML program manager for USDA Forest Service. And one of my tasks is to come up with an entire national inventory of all AML sites on national forest systems lands. And so I am looking for partners to figure out how to do this. And I also need to have a priority as well. So I have business cards, so I will, yeah. So I definitely want to partner for anyone who has this. And I also see a partners, not just federal, state, tribal, local communities, counties, but I see industry being a partner. They're going to know where AMLs are because that's where you go to prospect on your claims. And also academia. I see academia knowing where these things are too. So yeah.
Thank you. Looks like
She's right about the industry knowing. The reason I know that there's lots of prospect pits out there is I had a property in Colorado, took up 1/4 of a 7.5 minute quad, and there were probably about 700 X's on the map. And I know that most of them really had no risk to the environment because I went and sampled all of them. So, you know, that's the kind of thing that we often run into. It just depends on the situation. Virginia, you had a response?
So Virginia McLemore again. I would gladly be one of your partners because I have been working on the inventory of New Mexico since really the beginning of my career with the start of the uranium industry. Melvin has sent his people down to my office many times to gather data and to a lot of the stuff in New Mexico. And so we're still working on it. And one of the interesting things that I'd like to reiterate that was mentioned earlier is that our AML Bureau out of Mining, Minerals, and Natural Resources up in Santa Fe, they actually contracted me and my students at New Mexico Tech to do an inventory, and we chose 3 districts. And one of the districts I chose because, oh, there's only like 15 mines there. We get out there in the field and we're well over 100. And so this is one of the problems is that you do have to get boots on the ground and you do got to get out there. And another district that we got under one of the Earth MRI projects, once again, we are inventorying these mines as we go through in these projects. And it's the same thing. Here we thought this district was well known and we're actually mapping. And it's when you do the geologic mapping that you start coming to these features. And yet I can't convince my mappers that mines are geologic features. They see them and they want to run away because they don't understand economic geology and the AML issue. And so that's one thing that we do have to get into the USGS National Mapping Program, is that these mappers need to record this, and this needs to become part of that database because they're the ones out there really mapping. And fortunately, I do have one. And yeah, we've gone to several areas where aren't even in mining districts, and we're finding, you know, prospects. Now, most of them are not going to cause environmental issues, but until you know they're there and until you look at them, there still could be physical issues, as Melvin knows from a lot of his work. But even the environmental issues may still be there, even from some of these mid-sized prospects. I will say that I think New Mexico AML has a good idea of high risks. And so I think, you know, what Ann was saying, you know, whether they're high, mid, or low needs to be kind of ranked. But I think now we're starting to look at these mid risks. But I also, and I will make this comment later, is that we've got to understand these geological processes, because we don't always know what's going on once we start burying them. Thank you.
Which goes back to what Melvin was saying. Yeah.
Jim Gusick with Lincoln Engineering. Cheering off of what Ginny just said, you know, in terms of site characterization, the one thing that I think the USGS needs to start looking at as well is the microbiology of the mine waste that you're drilling into. For example, I was working on a coal refuse pile down in Alabama, and we did split spoon samples drilling through this stuff every 5 feet. And at a depth of 30 feet, we were finding 3% pyrite, no alkalinity, and a paste pH of 7. It was popcorn dry, and microbiologically, that zone was sterile. And so we concluded, and rightfully so, that the whole waste rock profile was, or this whole waste coal refuse pile was not contributing to the ARD problem. So if we started disturbing this, we're opening up Pandora's box. What we've really found is that on the surface, we had a forest. It was functioning as a store and release cover. I mean, nobody planted that forest. It invaded all by itself. So I guess what I'm saying is part of the site characterization, you should be looking for Acetylthiobacillus ferrooxidans in your soil profiles and making that as part of the process that y'all think about when you're, you know, when you run into pyrite. Doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, the end. You know, you may have a really good situation. You might not want to screw with it.
Perfect. Thank you, Jim. Jason's got a question, and then back to Rob.
Just quickly, Jason Willis, Trout Unlimited. Sarah put a plug in for Colorado. The mixed ownership group in Colorado has been functioning for 10 years with agencies, nonprofits, state agencies, and we have a really good database of sites. And Robert said one of the main struggles is kind of combining AmScam, Forest Service databases, all these historic quantifications of these features. And the mixed ownership group in Colorado has done a really good job of it. And we have draining mine subgroups that specialize in prioritizing some of the draining mine sites in Colorado and ranking them based on loading, flow, fluctuations in flow, chemistry, loading, that type of thing, and waste rock sites and some of the stuff that Jeff's doing. So, I mean, it seems like there's more and more momentum from state to state to try to quantify some of these things. But Colorado and the mixed ownership group has done another good job of doling out who's going to do what projects across the state as well, whether it's a Forest Service lead, EPA lead, nonprofit lead. So we can definitely chat about that.
Rob.
And for those of you who are online, don't forget you can put questions in the chat and we'll get those asked as well.
Hi, Rob Galleri again. So I'm going to bring it back to kind of the intercession that we're on. So Tawny and Corey, this is kind of for you two. You guys won first, great job in working so hard and getting that Good Samaritan bill pushed the way it is. We have great bipartisan support in the Senate. But from my understanding, the House has been slightly a little bit more difficult to crack at the moment to try to get something moved forward. Do you guys have any insight or plans to kind of try to push on both sides from there?
Yeah, the House, there's definitely a jurisdictional problem in the House too. You know, in the Senate, it just goes to Environment and Public Works Committee. In the House, you've got natural resources, transportation, infrastructure, and energy and commerce. So you've got a triple jurisdiction in the House that complicates moving the bill forward. But yeah, we have had and are having conversations with potential bill sponsors and folks who are interested in the bill, you know, seeing the value of it. And we're hopeful that we will be able to get companion legislation in the House and introduced, but, you know, don't have a timeline for that.
Yeah, I think I just would add, we're trying to educate members of Congress on the House side of what the bill does not do. So I think they've heard some rumors of bad things about the bill, and we're trying to insert some reality into what the language actually means. And so hoping that as soon as we get through that education process, we'll get some good bipartisanship sponsorship in the House pretty soon.
Is there anything that we can do from the field to help that along, both from both your perspectives? How do you fold in regionally? Now we're in the Southwest, so, and I saw in there we have New Mexico and both, I think one New Mexico senator or both of them. Yeah, both, and then both in Arizona on that co-signers. How can we, no matter where we're from, I mean, I'm up north at Nevada, how do we help drive the discussions in the House to indicate that there's a real groundswell of support for this legislation?
I think it's just as simple as contacting your congressman and saying you support it and why it's needed and why it's such a good bill.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it's a complicated issue, right? And if just learning about Good Sam and AML and reading a, what is it, a 55-page bill, like that's a lot to digest. And so I think, yeah, reaching out to members of Congress, I think writing letters is really important to really articulate the problem and why this is a solution to a problem that to clean up these sites that otherwise wouldn't make good Superfund candidates, and you know, perhaps that particularly in mixed ownership and private land sites where Good Sam is a solution to clean up abandoned mines that otherwise aren't going to be touched.
Okay, I have two comments from the online folks. Yeah, they're actually weighing in. First comment from Lloyd Viola. New Mexico BLM is continuing to inventory. I'm not sure I said his name right. I'm guessing he's from BLM in New Mexico, but they didn't tell us what organization they were with.
Okay.
So that's just a comment. And
So just for your information, Lord Mayola is with New Mexico AML program.
is he with the state or with the BLM?
He's with the abandoned mine lands program. They're different
Okay.
under the state. Yes.
State, it's a state organ. Okay, state aid. All right. And the other one is from Julie Nielsen, and I'm sure this is a response to Jim's comment. I doubt pyritic material at depth was sterile microbiologically, but the iron and sulfur oxidizers need oxygen, so they are not active below about 50 centimeters.
And so the.
You want to respond to that, Jim?
Like a happy hour conversation.
Okay.
Okay, you
We
have 1
did-
minute, Jim.
We have 1 minute. Okay, so we did do bacterial inventories, and we found bacteria down to 30 feet because the water and the air were getting there. But in some places it was, you know, and I want to say nothing is perfectly sterile. We did find there were 23 colonies versus 5 times 10 to the 6th colonies towards the surface. So it varied with depth, but not totally
We're
sterile.
good. Yeah.
Okay,
Sorry.
well,
Yeah, go ahead, Jenny. Yeah, I think he's close.
Real quick, I just want to mention that we did extensive work on the Cuesta rock piles, and there is biology several, 100 feet all the way down into the subsurface beneath the rock piles. So wherever oxygen and water get to, those little microbes are there. So don't think they're just at the surface.
should have done Sarah first. I would have gotten more steps in.
I'm just curious if, really briefly, if maybe these folks like Tammy and Corey could summarize maybe some of what the detractors or the people who don't support Good Sam, like some of what the kind of key hard line of why they're saying that, well, we don't support this bill. And
Yeah, happy to. It's a great question. I think one of the key points there is a misunderstanding about some of the bills. Like we've heard that the bill would create NEPA exemptions or waivers. No, it doesn't. It says if a project may have significant impacts, instead of doing an EIS, it's just not going to go forward as a project. So I think that's where that education piece comes in, is to really get a good understanding about what the bill does and doesn't do. The issue of citizen suits has kind of long been a challenging kind of nut to crack there, and remains so. And then, I kind of talked a little bit about reprocessing. There's a fear that somehow these projects are going to turn into mining projects. And the bill specifically says, no, you can't do that. But I think after, over 2 decades of this issue kind of being debated, that there's some misunderstanding, some may say myths about what the bill does and doesn't do, that a honest reading of the legislation would hope to clear some of those up.
And I think this is probably pointing out the obvious. Anytime you open up conversation about quintessential environmental laws like the Clean Water Act and CERCLA, there will always be some trepidation of what exactly does this mean and what are the unintentional consequences of doing so. And so we tried to draft a bill that really was tailored to allow these specific projects under rigorous permitting constraints and oversight from the federal, state, and tribal governments, that it can be done right. But I think some folks that are still questioning that, unfortunately, haven't been at the table the last 2 years. And so maybe weren't privy to a lot of the good discussions that the various stakeholders were having and why those compromises were made. So we look forward to working with them and finding a solution.
I actually have a question I've been dying to ask. Congratulations for getting us as far as we have. Hopefully we get it all the way across the line. And then those projects go forward, we select them. And obviously a lot of thought's been given to how we do that. So once that happens and we prove that this concept of Good Sam works, what's next? And I know it may seem premature to ask, but it's taken us over 25 years to get to here. So we probably ought to be getting a plan in place to keep moving forward, even while we're working on this one and doing the pilot project. Thoughts?
Yeah, and the one other thing I should mention too on concerns about the legislation is, fears that a Good Samaritan, well-meaning, would unintentionally create problems, the next Gold King. And the bill is specific to authorize only low-risk projects to minimize the chance that that could even happen. But I think, after 7 years, reauthorizing the bill, whether it's to extend the sunset on it or to permanently authorize it, would be the goal. And to use that 7-year, 15-year project to really prove it up and show those who may be suspicious of this model that it can be done well, get these improvements in the environment, and really prove it up. But after 20 some odd years of trying to move the legislation forward, we don't want to be sitting around for another quarter century after the 7-year period and having those same conversations. So want to use that time period to make sure that as we then go back to Congress, that hopefully we'll be able to move swiftly and smoothly.
I think I would just only add that as we were trying to put this bill together and making the compromises we did in negotiating, we always had our eyes set on the future of whatever we say in this pilot project bill sets a marker for broader Good Sam legislation. And while there are provisions in that bill that will need to be renegotiated when you open it up to just projects generally and not just low risk projects, there will be other negotiations that had to be done, but we have always looked as this is the stepping stone to a broader bill.
I wonder if you guys could define what low risk means to you, but also to the bill, because that I think is critical. It could still be a very large project, but what are the parameters that you're looking for, or what are you looking not to engage in?
Not active water treatment.
Yeah, I'd see low risk, for instance, treating drainage after it leaves the adit, through cost-effective engineered wetlands, something along those lines, so that if something goes wrong, you're going back to the baseline environmental conditions. That to me would define low risk.
Would you also include like removal of waste rock from stream borders and things like that? More of the dirt removal stuff that you guys have been able to accomplish
Yeah, definitely.
under your AOCs?
Yeah, definitely those non-point source projects.
Natalie, looks like you might have a comment.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, because there's some of our sites where it's just a waste rock or a tailings pile that needs to be regraded and cover, and those are pretty, for us, considered low risk.
And maybe even pulled out of a stream,
Yeah,
Right,
pulled
so
out
that-
or even removed from the site completely.
especially in reprocessing.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think there's,
I have one
oh, he's got one.
from
He's got a
the,
live one from the ether.
yeah, from the ether. Diane Anderson, who's
Oh,
one
hi,
of the
Diane.
organizers of this. She's not here
Yep.
with us.
Yep.
But she asked, does Nevada Mining Association or, sorry, National Mining Association, apologize, Tanya, and or Trout Unlimited have some good talking points to help clarify what the bill does and doesn't do, so that can be shared, say, on a website, so organizations can learn more about this draft before they decide whether or not they want to join as a sponsor.
Yes, and happy to send those along to anybody interested.
Maybe if you could provide that, those links, we'll make sure that we include that when we post everything on the website from this summit. Just a plug back to the MMSA website. It has all the information, all the talks from the previous summits from 2018, 2019, and our Zoom efforts to bridge the gap. And these will be placed there as well. So we'll make sure that we include those links. It's always great to get a bulleted summary from a bill so that you can sort of dive into the 55-page. That seems kind of light.
There is a section by section and a one-page summary, which are good starters.
Awesome. That's great. The question I have for the crowd is, and it has to do with inventorying, because it's been such an issue, for the 5 years that we've been having these discussions, if you will, through MMSA and these summits. Is there an appetite or a mechanism that could be promoted through our efforts here, that we could do a state-by-state inventorying process, taking examples from Rob and Nevada, taking examples from what the Forest Service is dealing with, taking examples from what USGS is now charged with. Your focus is sort of on a bit of a specific task, whereas a broader inventory would help you identify those quicker. Is there an appetite to organize that sort of thing on a state-by-state basis, because the states have particular parameters that they work in, the tribes do too, so it would be a regional activity definitely for the tribes to participate in. Throw it out with, Virginia.
I think one of the issues with doing a comprehensive inventory that I'm facing in Mexico, I mean, I'm using some of the USGS database preservation funds to further my inventory. And like I said, the state AML program provided us with some funds as well. But the other really issue is funds. I mean, we've got students at our universities in all of the states that could be working this. Most of our state surveys have a lot of this data already there, and it's just a matter of getting it into a database and having students do it. But we need that funding to really do it. It's a matter when you talk to the AML groups, and I don't want to speak so much for them, they can chime in since they're listening, thankfully. But do you want the dollars to go into inventory, or do you want the dollars to go into cleanup? And fortunately, our state did say, well, we'll give you a little bit to see how this progresses. And then, that's the thing is, how much money do you want to spend in inventory? And you certainly have got to be cleaning these sites up as you go along.
Yeah, Jason?
I just think to build on that from a funding aspect is, that's why that mixed ownership model that I mentioned is so appropriate, is because while an agency might lack funding to do a site characterization, Trout Unlimited could come in with some of our private funding, and we've shown that we'll fill in some of the funding gaps to expand that data set. The state might also have funding. EPA site assessment typically has funding, and they've been the lead for the mixed ownership group in Colorado as EPA, and they're kind of like the hierarchy, but we all work together to pool our own funding resources to characterize sites, because we know there are limitations for that. So I think whenever you're talking about some sort of model, it would be some sort of mixed ownership model where you're pulling all of these entities together, pulling their funding resources to do that site identification, because it is so expensive to quantify some of these.
Yeah, it's a great example. Yeah.
I was gonna add too, here at ADEQ, we primarily work with non-point source funding from the Clean Water Act, and then our partnership with Forest Service. Hey, Mark, they're key partners too, because we'll combine their funding and then our non-point source funds to work on the sites. But that's critical, because you can spend eons inventorying features and analyzing their contributions without actually fixing anything. So we're trying to strike that balance between finding sites and fixing them too.
Excellent point.
So with Virginia, coming up with funding, and then Jason Willis talking about like mixed ownership, like I'm wondering if the solution, like with kind of inventorying and state by state and trying to figure out like how to combat, problems with coming up with like a complete inventory database, would be to enter into like a memorandum of agreement with partners at the national level and include not just, tribes, federal, state, county, city, but also, NGOs, mining industry, and any kind of other, institution, maybe even, like I said, academia that might have grants, in order to pull funding, so that you have a multi-arm, and then find a funding agent, preferably not a federal agency, because when our funds expire, they go poof and they're gone. So you want to have like a non-regulatory agency that holds the funds, and then kind of, and then you can have them hold the funds too for cleanup, right? Because cleanup also is the most expensive, as we know, with back gates being, back gates or things like that being the most expensive. So
The other thing to contemplate too is long-term operations and maintenance as well, funding for that and ongoing sampling needs too, because you can clean
True.
up a site, but the work's not done.
true, very true. Like some of these sites, Natalie, like where I'm from down in Coronado, like, we don't have water. So, unless there's monsoon, we don't have long-term maintenance. But, some of these other places, it's like, water. That's not an issue I normally have to worry about. So actually, having some sort of long-term maintenance is not normally something I have to think about as far as like active treatment. So.
You have another question in the back?
Another thing to think about is, as we all know, that the lack of a Good Samaritan bill has been something that has kept the mining industry sort of hands tied for quite a while. Not that things haven't been done, and certainly Jason has some great examples of where he's gotten funding through the industry. But I think when that happens, I think we'll see some more source of funding coming out there as well. I think it'll be make a big difference.
Thank you. This is Ryan Ellis from Interstate Mining Compact Commission. And I wanted to make more comments than questions, I think, but on two things. One, building off of what Virginia was saying, what others have said, certainly funding is the main obstacle to doing more inventorying, but that comes back to the fact that fortunately there is this authorization for a lot of new funding for hard rock AML, so it just makes that all the more important to get that going forward. If the states see that they're going to have an ongoing source of funding, that will, I think, do a lot to invigorate their inventorying efforts, because there's a reason to do the inventory. You're going to have money to do reclamation as well as work on the inventory. And one of the things that we've been talking about, Rob earlier mentioned that we have convened a group of states, not only our member states at the AML Association and IMCC, but quite a few non-members as well, to talk through, what would a new this new grants program look like. One of the things we've talked about is how would we, suggest that funding be apportioned so that states can be working on their inventories and working on reclamation in the short term, given that there's really quite a patchwork in terms of which states already have good inventories and are ready to rock, and which ones really need to stand up an inventory like Michigan, for example, before they can do any new work. So that's one thing. But the second is on the question of state by state inventories. The first thing that we did with this big group that we convened is a survey trying to get our arms a little better around the circumstances in each state with respect to their inventories. And I think that turned out to be a pretty good document. It's not fully complete, certainly, but we had quite a good, I think we had 40 plus states represented in the survey. In a lot of states there are multiple agencies, so I don't know that we got every single agency at the state level that has hard rock AML work in their portfolio or is doing inventorying. But long story short, if people are interested in seeing that, we're happy to share it. And we'd also be very happy to have more state folks, if there are agencies that we missed in that effort, to join. We may update it in the future, or maybe even make that an ongoing project. But yeah, if anybody's interested to see that, I think that's a good start at least.
Yeah, maybe if you could hand me your card, I'd love to put that into maybe a next step opportunity.
Certainly.
Thanks. Jeff?
We have one other one from the ether,
From the ether?
and this comes from Debbie Strusacker,
Okay.
who
Hello, Debbie.
many in this room know. Hi, Debbie. Following up on the count 'em or clean 'em up comment, the inventory effort should be viewed as dynamic and in parallel with cleanup work. We don't need to know the universe of AML sites before we concentrate on remediation.
I think that's why the group is sort of focused on low, medium, and high risk, with the caveat that, and it depends on how low is quantified, but I guess there's another category, a minimalist category, that maybe is insignificant, and those are maybe, Debbie, if you're listening, you could give us the percentage breakdown that of a very good article that she did, where she broke down, I think, NGOs accounting of the AMLs across the country. But I think it was something like 75% were minimal to insignificant, and then the 25% would go low, medium, and high risk. So she's exactly right. Not needing to know the minimal impacts, but really honing in on the ones that we can begin to make a difference on.
Got another one.
Got another one.
Yeah, and Debbie, if you want to give us those numbers, you can just send me a text. I got my phone right here. From Carrie Monahan, who will be one of the speakers in the next session. Here in California, we are coupling hydraulic mine remediation with large forest health and fuels reduction work. In this way, we benefit from the cultural and biological surveys done as part of NEPA. On the implementation side of things, we have crews already in there and mobilized doing fuels reduction, so they can also do the remediation work. We are also coupling soil amendments with forest health work using wood chips and biochar created as part of the fuel reductions work and used as part of the AML work.
Right. Hopefully she'll be speaking to that in Jeff's panel that follows this one. I I don't want to put Alex and her group in the back, and also Leroy, hello. It's nice to see you from the AEMA conference. Do you guys have anything that you want to add in from your various tribe and agency perspectives on possible partnerships and maybe inventories that you guys have done that might be helpful?
In Tucson. Great to be here and thank you for the opportunity. So I took kind of an interesting route. I used to do a lot of mining history and a lot of AML archaeological inventory. So, you know, I think what's really important and what we're going to talk about later is trying to bring tribes into that decision space of some of these abandoned mine lands, these programs. What's really interesting, I've always found in my history studies, is that a lot of tribal members are the ones who discovered these lands originally. Told pioneers, we have to remember, you know, this was ancestral land. So, you know, bringing tribes into not only mine planning, but mine reclamation planning is something that's really, you know, important to me and ties directly back into the discovery and to involve tribes and really think about reclaiming these lands in a way, you know, that considers tribal values is something that's really important to our group. But, you know, there are a lot of abandoned mine lands on different tribal reservations, obviously Navajo Nation. But I'm not really aware of any large scale other AML inventories on other tribes. Are other people know about any of that? Other tribal lands besides Navajo? Are there big AML inventories on tribal lands?
Like with the Hopi or the Apache or, right? Yeah, great
So
question.
part of the National Association of Abandoned Mines, there are 3 tribes that are part of it: Crow, Hopi, and Navajo Nation.
Thank you, sir.
And it sounds like maybe an opportunity for others to join in that. Natalie, if I could, and anybody else who's here with state agencies, what additional opportunities do you see to partner with you guys on projects that you're advancing forward, and what kind of partners are you looking for?
Partners can run the gambit. So a lot of times we partner with private landowners who actually buy land that they may not even know there's an abandoned mine feature on it.
Whoops.
And so we work a lot with them up in the Bradshaws near Prescott. And then, of course, with outside consultants as well as Forest Service too. We haven't quite branched out onto BLM land yet, though. So that could be another potential when we do that complete inventory. And then we're always looking for new ideas on how to kind of go beyond the traditional solutions for remediation and kind of consider the long-term sustainability of the land and potential reuse or redevelopment.
Okay, great. Is there anybody in the audience from the BLM in this region? Okay, thanks. Maybe they're on the Zoom call. Yeah.
We have a response back from Debbie.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. Thanks, Deb.
It's not the numbers. It's where to find the numbers. It's in my comments from the 2019 AML Summit. Also, we already know where the worst problems are. The pursuit of a comprehensive inventory was a problem with the SMACRA program because states use their inventories to compete for AML funds. We should try to avoid that problem if and when a federal AML fund is established. And if you want to find Debbie's comments on that from the 2019 summit, you will find them on the MMSA site.
There's a table in there where she breaks it down. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, if I may just piggyback on that too, I think that, you know, once the Section 407 or 04 program from the infrastructure bill is stood up, the legislation wasn't terribly prescriptive about how that money should be spent, just giving a range of activities, including characterization, inventory, actual projects. And I think what's really important is for the Department of the Interior and the BLM to provide that guidance how that grant program is going to work for states and native nations, and how that funding is going to be prioritized on the federal lands. Because it was split 50-50, 50% of the funding is supposed to go for projects on federal lands and then 50% as grants to states and tribes. So that direction from the department to stand up the program is extremely important.
Just to add on to what Debbie said, or a response to that. So one of the issues that we've been trying to discuss with the National Association is how that these grant funding would be dispersed through OEPC or whoever ends up under DOI with the program long-term, because it will be handed off eventually. And it's difficult. Coal is a little bit easier. It's one commodity, right? Yeah, there's different variations, but there's one commodity. Now you're looking at everything that's non-coal. So how do we disperse these funds is an ongoing question. Inventory is always thrown out as a starting point. Past production, good luck trying to find that in a lot of places. Current production is also an idea of one of those things used too, but then that may not be as fair to some states compared to Nevada. I'd love that to be the case, because then we'd be number one by far and away, right? But that's not going to help out every other state. So that's something that has been thrown out a lot. And unfortunately, inventory seems to be the most standard, or at least consistent progress moving forward with that. So if there's other ideas, we'd love to hear it, because how these funds are going to be dispersed long term is a really big question.
I have another response from Debbie. Thank you,
course.
Debbie.
Gotcha.
She sent us the numbers, okay?
Okay.
So here you go. This was from Debbie's presentation in the 2019 summit. 35% of AML sites are benign. 41% are landscape disturbances. 21% are safety hazards. 3% are environmental problems.
So if you took that 25%, like just north of 75% are benign to non-landscape, I mean, not ecosystem related, you have 25% that you could really hone your attention in on. And the reason I'm fixated on this, if you will, is that potentially if this bill comes out, when it comes out, I think we, as part of this summit effort, no matter where we host it, one of the outcomes could be a list that begins y'all in Congress, but everybody else can be thinking about, that says, well, here in Arizona, here are my top 10 priorities. Here in New Mexico, here's my top 10 priorities. There in Nevada, there in Utah, and across the West, if you will, because on the AML issue that we're talking about here, it's largely hard rock because coal is covered elsewhere. So this would be on the hard rock side and the tribes input would be, here's our 10, maybe the Hopi, the Navajo, the Apache, and so on, each have 10 top priorities that they'd like to be considered for. And then we put that in a room and figure out what's the best ones best to come out at 15, correct? Yeah. That would illustrate the best opportunity to bring improvements forward to prove that this type of effort between agencies, fed and state, industry, tribes, communities, so on and so forth, the stakeholders, the conservation groups, where we can illustrate, working together, we can illustrate this program has the feet to be carried forward beyond just the pilot. I think that's why I keep driving it home, that inside each one of us, but there's plenty of us that have walked the hills here, we have an idea of where there are some pretty key areas that could use some significant improvements, that maybe they're not going to break the bank, but we can show that that investment has a great return, and that the improvements and the stabilization are immediate for plants, humans, and others. Any other questions? We still have about 10 minutes. You got another live one?
Yeah, Debbie and I are having a dialogue here.
Nice. Debbie, you should have come down.
I know she should have come. by the way, she sent the presentation to me. She emailed it to me. Maybe we could post it in this summit materials as well, since it's been referenced. I
Oh,
think it's an
perfect.
important one.
Yep, yep.
But she wanted to point out that this came out in her presentation in Reno in 2019, that the numbers she's given are based on a mineral policy study book, and now Earthworks.
Mineral
On
Policy
AML,
Center
sorry,
work.
Mineral
Yep.
Policy Center, which is now Earthworks.
Yep.
A book that they did on AML. So these are not numbers coming from, well, I don't know where the source is, but it's actually something that Earthworks published.
Yep, that they published, yep,
So,
yeah. So taking that, we've been able to kind of distill it, or others have distilled it.
Good morning. First of all, thank all of you for not only being here, but for the great comments. Maybe I'm going to go down a little bit of a path because I'm going to follow on something that Jeff brought up. 15 mines is 15 sites is a really, really tiny sample size.
Correct.
And let me go out here and say, let's just say this gets debated for another year and a half. You then pick sites that could take a year, two. Then you're going to take 7 years to do a pilot. We're now mid 2030. Anybody that's in Congress, let's assume that 40% of the people that back this are not in Congress anymore. Now you're going to try and come up with what the next thing is going to be. Are you going to do 40 for another 10 years? Are you going to do 50 for another 17 years? How does it achieve a momentum so that there is this, I think, wave of things that bring about a bigger impact? And I don't mean that what's going to be done in the pilot isn't big impact. I'm just thinking, how does it leap to another level? Because I think this is scratching the surface, and I don't mean to demean it in any way, but I look at it and say, we're 15 years potentially away from the outcome of a pilot. I'm going to guess that half the people in this room will be playing golf somewhere and will be completely fixated on something else. But it's that momentum, it's that leaping. How do we get to that?
Can I get you to provide your name and affiliation?
Yes, Hank Marshall with a company called Clearflow Group based here in Phoenix. And we specialize particularly in the mining industry in water reclamation and water remediation. And we do that globally, and we've been doing it for 20 years.
Thanks. It's a great question. And I will put a plug into this process. We were talking four pilot projects. So we've gone 4 times. I'm thinking like we're already showing the growth curve, but yeah, I'll let you guys go ahead and tackle that one. Unless you're already on the golf course.
I think the only thing I'll say too is like, we all have a selling job to do. We need to market the successes. We need to tell those stories and tell them over and over and over again and build that, that base of knowledge so that it does carry forth.
It wouldn't be the first time a federal program has to be reauthorized. And generally speaking, once you've got something in law on the books, it's harder to not have that reauthorized. But we get your point. We spent almost 20 years on a broad Good Samaritan bill that would have allowed all the projects. And unfortunately, there just wasn't a political will to make that happen. So we have to start small, and I don't know, maybe it gives job security for the future. Future geologists and miners and NGOs and lawyers. But again, I think championing the successes is going to help tremendously.
I think one way that we've got to keep building this momentum is that we've got to bring in not only our college students at our universities, not just in mining and geology, but also in environmental sciences. But we've got to get to our undergraduate, our secondary schools, our elementary school kids in particular. Those kids have so much momentum, so much energy. And if you can build that in a lot of the junior high school programs, they require those students to do science fair projects, and they need mentors. I mean, I just judged some, and COVID has really hit these kids bad. I have never seen such poor papers as I did this past year. And it's because the science teachers don't have the time or the energy to work with these kids. So it means that we've got to help fill the gap. And so, and I know Trout Unlimited, I know a lot of these other organizations have gone out, and I know our AML program is now looking at how to engage some of these, the younger kids before they get into college. I know the Navajo Nation has done this. And so it's more of bringing some of those successes. I mean, I have a Navajo student working with me on one of my projects that was mentored somewhere along the line and is going to be into geology, and she's going to be very marketable, and I hope she gets a really good job when she finishes my master's program with me. But these are the kinds of things we got to get, and it's very easy. You partner with your local universities, you partner with your local schools, partner with your kids. I mean, I took my kids out when I was working on my dissertation, and I'm now a grandmother, so you know how long ago that was. But they were out there with me in my dissertation doing their science fair projects. And some of that's actually in my dissertation. And so these things are possible, and they're things that we need to start doing, is getting these younger folks. Not only do they provide the energy that I'm starting to lose, but they still invigorate me. So that's how you get that momentum built. And once those kids get involved, somehow congressmen understand that and they hear about it.
Jason?
Oh, I was just going to add something, and I was going to ask you, Jason, because I think this is important. I think I heard you on probably a couple of presentations about the current state of affairs. So when Trout Unlimited tries to do this work, they need to go through this process with EPA and the federal agencies and get an AOC, and it takes years to negotiate that language. And then the work that you take on the ground, I think one time you said it was like a couple of years of legal negotiations and 2 to 3 weeks of actual work. So like that's where we are. And so hopefully the 15 projects that not only allow TU to do better work and like more extensive work, but also allows mining companies finally to say, hey, we've got money and resources and equipment and technology, and we want to do it too. You've now opened up the universe to many more projects than can happen today. Sorry, Jason.
No, and I think we're on the same wavelength, Tawny, because that's kind of where I was going. But, you know, and it goes to the whole comment from before is, I feel like this bill is a tool in the toolbox, right? We have the Good Samaritan administrative tools right now, the AOC you mentioned, the comfort letter. Things have been getting better. You know, like I, for example, was able to get a comfort letter in 4 months from the EPA last year to do on the ground work. So the fact that EPA is recognizing those tools as viable tools, I mean, this 15 pilot project, it's going to set the stage for what I see more of like the point source treatment, ideally,
right,
where we're going to continue to do good work. I mean, my program in general has done 40 projects over the last 10 years using these administrative tools. So we're going to keep doing the good work on the ground. We're going to work on this using this tool in the toolbox. So it's building that momentum. And Tawny said something earlier in her presentation that's it's building that trust and confidence with the agencies to get more work done, and we're just going to keep doing it. And this is just another tool that we're going to keep using. So I feel like things are coming along with the administrative tools like the AOC and the comfort letter, and we're gonna keep doing good stuff with those. So
thanks. Hey, Jeff, Abby, I'm going to put you on the spot again, if that's okay, as Jeff's walking back to you. He's in the back corner.
Oh.
And Abby, I'll pose my question to you after Jeff deals with this online question. Thank
you. This is another question or comment from Carrie Monahan, who again is one of our panelists in the next session. I think we need a ready to proceed conveyor belt of projects, a pipeline of sites at different stages of development, so that when these federal fire drills for funding come up, we're ready to advance the sites.
That's so true. That excellent point, Carrie, because that'll actually put an extra pressure on Congress. Look, we're waiting in the field. Would you just give us the tool? So Abby, building on what we've been talking about here, how do we fold in the tribes, and Melvin, I'd push it out to you as well, in this whole process? How do we make sure that the tribes are a part of it too, so that we have an integrated outreach and success stories because, you know, as an industry professional, I'm coming from like an engineer's perspective. Okay, we're going to go out, we're going to do this, this, and this. We have to fold in tribal considerations too, as you pointed out earlier in your comment, to see how do we then make those improvements even better.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Ann. And I think, it's really important from a tribal perspective to involve the tribes from the beginning, right? Not just come with a plan, this is what's happening, really to get input during that pre-planning stage. For instance, we're going to talk about some things later, but it could be certain types of vegetation out there could have uses, could have cultural significance, could be of value. Maybe there could be different reseeding mixes. Maybe we need to consider other things when we're reclaiming these lands, to really get it back into a condition that it could be of use for tribes for various reasons, whether it's natural resources collection or just, visitation, trying to get it back to its more natural appearance. So, really I've been doing, tribal consultation, tribal engagement for years, and key is to involve those stakeholders who have affiliation to that land early and not wait until the project is, ready to build and go in and try to get input then. I think that's really the best advice I could give.
Thanks much. We're going to build on that in the later afternoon one with the tribal monitoring discussions and build off of these early conversations and questions. Are there any other? Yeah, Melvin, please.
So from the Navajo Nation's point of view, I think a lot of it, you have to remain active. You got to have good spokespersons, and a lot of it comes down to your public relations and education. Everybody out there doesn't know what we're doing. So it's a lot of teaching to them and communication. SMACRA, for example, was scheduled to end back in 2004, but with the association and IMCC, different organizations pushing the initiatives, getting the word from the states and tribes to the federal level, it's been reauthorized a couple of times. Just last year, it was reauthorized for another 13 years, so it'll take us into 2030, whatever. But being able to get out there and share your information, your on-the-ground accomplishments is what it's going to take. We've been able to get all our tribal leaders out and take them to our activities so that they can see what we've done in terms of reclamation. We've even gotten the New Mexico congressional and Arizona congressional folks out to the sites, and we talked to them about what we're doing on the ground reclamation. And we also push our word as to what we need on the ground to get our jobs done. So communication, education are big things that we have to push.
Thank you, Melvin. Any other immediate, we have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just want to draw a line under or reinforce what several people have said. And I love your idea about getting top 10 sites
Each
posted
state.
up for each state.
Yeah,
But I really appreciate what Corey and Hank and Melvin had to say, which is, getting the good news out there is really important. Corey and Melvin, I completely agree. And maybe that could be on your website with your top 10 so that you show not just where the need is, but what the benefits are.
excellent.
Hank, maybe that's a way to help ensure that 15 years from now, when the next round comes up, that people don't have to remember, they don't have to have been 110 years old because they were there sponsor for the last bill, but they actually have a place where they've seen the benefits of these activities. Right? So
So
that's it. I'm just
excellent
reinforcing
point.
everybody else. I have nothing to add.
Thanks. He made my point. That's
Thanks, Jeff.
great. So no other questions. We're at coffee break time. This was really, really informative. I want to thank each and every one of you guys for participating, and to the panel, a round of applause for all the good content.